A few solitary headstones lean in the tangled grass and weeds, and despite the proximity of several modern farm buildings, there is loneliness to this remote spot. This is the site of Langenhoe Church. It was built in the 14th century, damaged by an earthquake in 1884, and believed by many to have been the most haunted church in England. Early in the year of 1937, the Reverend Ernest Merriweather was inducted as rector of the church. Coming from the north of England, he had never yet before encountered the paranormal, but soon after his arrival he began to experience strange incidents at his church. Initially, these were seemingly insignificant episodes, such as the rector's valise, a small case for carrying his vestments and books, unaccountably locking itself when left in the vestry. Every effort to open the valise proved unsuccessful in the church and churchyard, yet Merriweather found he could unlock the case when he was in the lane away from the building. On the 20th of September 1937, the rector was alone in the church. It was still, an autumn day, with not a breath of wind. Without warning, the west door slammed shut with an almighty crash. Such was the force of the door closing that the whole church seemed to shake. These early odd incidents were recorded by Reverend Merriweather in his diary. Many of the entries described typical poltergeist activity, such as the movement of objects within the church and the sound of thudding noises which were heard coming from the vestry. Curiously, the initial outburst of phenomena was followed by a lull of several years when nothing strange was reported. However, on the 28th of September 1950, while in the vestry, the rector heard the voice of a young woman singing. The sounds, which resembled plainsong, emanated from the west end of the building. When the music died away, the sound of a man's heavy footsteps were heard walking slowly up the aisle. The rector quietly entered the church from the vestry, whereupon the footsteps ceased abruptly, and he found the nave empty. A week later, the vicar arrived at the church to find two workmen crouched by the west door, looking through the keyhole. The workmen beckoned to him to come and listen. Singing was heard coming from the empty church. All three men then explored the building, even climbing the spiral staircase to the tower, but the church was deserted. On another occasion during Christmas Eve of 1950, as Merriweather was walking up the nave toward the chancel, a curious vague form seemed to suddenly appear from nowhere. The apparition slowly glided across the nave and disappeared into the pulpit. On separate occasions during Sunday service, as the rector stood by the altar officiating, he saw the figure of a woman in late medieval or Tudor dress cross the west end of the church and vanish through a wall. One day, whilst practicing at the organ, when alone in the church, he felt as he was being watched from behind. Turning from his seat, he saw the figure of a woman looking at him. She immediately vanished, but Merriweather recalls her being attired in a modern cream dress. Although the rector had not, up to that time, undertaken any research into the history of Langenhoe, he later learned that the villagers had for many years considered the area as being haunted. Local legends tell of a lady in black who walks around the church at night, and an account of two sisters in 1908 who reported seeing the figure of a woman dressed like a nun, which moved slowly along the path before disappearing into the north walls. Yet, is there possibly a more sinister reason for the strange phenomena which has occurred at Langenhoe over the years? Does evil stalk this region in the form of an ancient curse? In 1959, Reverend Merriweather retired from the ministry when Langenhoe and the neighbouring parish of Abberton were closed. In 1962, it was demolished. Its disused graveyard, now consumed by weeds and nettles, is the only reminder that a church had once stood there. Reverend Ernest Merriweather passed away in 1965, and the strange events which had taken place at this lonely village on the marshes had all but faded from memory. When you visit the churchyard today, there is a definite feeling of oppression as you walk around it. Did the spirits and spectres still haunt the graveyard to this day?